Hi everyone, Dr. Samantha Cottrera here for the Imagining a New We video blog, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. This is Betty. She is working real hard today, as you can see. So November the 11th is Remembrance Day in Canada and Veterans Day in the United States. And for these Source Saturday videos that I've been doing since September of 2020, I've been talking with historians and creators and archivists about one or two primary sources and what they read from it to be able to model for history educators the ways that we can deconstruct primary sources, but also the background knowledge that can help us with analysis. And it's been a really great series, and I was particularly looking at Remembrance Day as a way for us to do a couple really cool things. So I'm going to be doing 5 different videos, not just on Saturdays, but spread out over the week in order to highlight some primary sources related to Remembrance Day and related to the people, the men and women who have served in the military in Canada and also the US, because today I'm speaking with an American historian, which is really cool. I'm talking with Dr. Matt Luckett. He is a historian of the American West. Something I don't know about, but actually, if you've been watching my video series for a while, like since the spring, you might remember I spoke to a British teacher who used her non-teaching coronavirus time to do research on women in the American West. And so I should connect them. That'd be kind of an interesting connection. He is a historian of the American West, and has a book coming out this week, and the title is, and I'm reading it, Never Caught Twice: Horse Stealing and Culture in Western Nebraska, 1850 to 1890. It's going to be released, like I said, any day now, but his next project is the project that we're talking about today, which is called Grandpa's Letters, which is a collection of letters from his paternal grandfather, who was on a Navy ship during the attack on Pearl Harbor. And I think this is just the beginning of Matt's work on this project. And I happened to see it on a tweet, and I was like, do you want to talk about this for the series? And he said yes, which I'm really excited about, because I believe it's just like the early days of this project. And it's just so wonderful to be able to talk with people at various stages of their work in these video series. So that's also an invitation to let me know if you want to talk about a project. Anyway, so I'm really excited to talk with Matt. He also is the coordinator for the Masters of Arts program at the California State University, Dominguez Hills, and he teaches, as you can see, I'm reading, at Sacramento State and Sierra College. It's really cool to be able to have this video series to talk with people from schools and places that I wouldn't have contacted with or been in connection with normally. And Matt is one of those people, and I'm just really excited to be able to meet him. So let's go over to Zoom and talk with Matt about his grandfather's letters. Matt, I'm so glad that we connected this week and we're able to have this conversation about Grandpa's Letters project, because I think it's such a valuable project to be able to think of in relation to Remembrance Day or Veterans Day in the United States. Before we begin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Luckett. I am a lecturer at Sierra College and Sacramento State University in California. I also run a master's degree program at California State Dominguez Hills. So,
so are you in California now?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm in Sacramento.
Okay. And for people watching, we're filming this at the end of a very stressful week for many of you Americans. And so it's interesting because we talked about whether or not we should do it before or after voting day, because this notion of patriotism, I think, also has a lot more resonance when you are looking at people's words from letters during these military conflicts. And I'm really glad that we can bring that perspective to this very kind of stressful moment in American history.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, it's been surreal the last few days. So,
yeah. So before everything was about going out to vote and then the count, I saw a tweet about this new project that you're working on. Can you please tell us what the project is and why it connects with Remembrance Day or Veterans Day? And yeah, and then we're going to talk about some documents.
So my grandfather was a Pearl Harbor survivor. And then after Pearl Harbor, he was in the Navy. And then he served throughout the duration of America's involvement in the war, right to the very end. And so a few years ago, he told me, so Matt, you know, you're an historian. I'm going to give you all my letters. And I'm like, all right, sure. And thanks a lot, Grandpa. I guess I'll have to find a place for him. But, you know, then he passed away in 2018. And I get this just massive volume of letters, about 600, 650. Like, I haven't counted them, but it's hundreds and hundreds of letters.
Wow.
And I start reading them, and I'm sucked into it, and I want to do something on it, and I want to make some sort of project. So I start scanning them, and I start sharing them with family, and then I start writing about them on this blog. And then it became a thing, and then it became sort of a biography of my grandpa, because he was an engineer on a destroyer and also on an oiler, which are two representatives that you don't really see a whole lot, you know, when we're so used to like the Pacific, Saving Private Ryan and stuff like that. So I really wanted to tell his story and his ship's story and the story of, like, you know, basically like the engineers in the war, because we don't often get that perspective.
And I feel like in that first tweet that I saw, it seemed like you were at the beginning of a project, but then like looking at your blog, it seems very kind of thought through. Do you mean, I mean, maybe when I read that, I don't know if you actually did say that, but it did have to do with like beginning to think about the book that I know you want to write from it and then analysis of it?
So it's been kind of evolving. It started off as a few blog posts, and then I started blogging like every month of letters. So looking through the list, there's like in 1942, there's a January post, and then there's like a February through I guess March post, and then I just started doing them month by month by month. And as I was doing that, I was trying to like connect the story together, and it basically turned into that. So I recently finished that, and I got to the point where he goes home after the war. It's, you know, it's October 1945, and now it's like, well, I want to turn this into a book, but there's other stuff that I want to do, you know, and there's other people I want to talk to, and two of his shipmates in the Chew, which is the ship he was on during Pearl Harbor, for instance, passed away during the attack. So I want to get some information on them, maybe even contact their families. There were 4 sailors from Guam that he sailed with. I want to talk about them, you know, because we so seldom talk about people of color on these ships. And so I want to bring them into the narrative. So there's a whole lot of extra research that I have to do for it. So like what I have now is like that, you know, straight up narrative of my grandpa, but there's all these other little threads and members of my family that want to weigh in on it too. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going to go into it, but that's kind of like the next phase of it.
It's interesting that you say that. Do you know about this graphic novel, Two Generals?
I do not.
It's an American book. I mean, a Canadian book, so it's not a surprise. But you should check it out because it is based on like letters and photographs of Scott Chandler, who's a graphic, not like a comic book artist, and his grandfather's letters with his friend. And so like, you know, I don't know if you want to do like a traditional book, but this like graphic narrative is such an interesting interpretation of like those letters. And like they use like red for death, which was just beautiful. And you know, when you're saying like, oh, I want to do this research and I'm trying to put the story together, like I immediately thought of that because that was the way, because he's an artist, that's the way he came to this. But there's so many interesting ways to tell a story. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I'm just so curious. Did you learn new things about your grandfather because you got to read such intimate letters?
Yes, I did. And one thing I didn't mention too, and this is also something I haven't done yet. It's I have about 100 letters from my grandmother.
Mm.
And I never met my grandmother. So she
Oh,
died about 2 years before. She always wanted grandkids, and that was, she never had any when she was alive that were, biologically hers. And so, anyway, you know, I'm learning a lot about her, and it's been
interesting.
great and wonderful to get to know her, and it's been a real blessing and a real gift to learn so much about not just my grandpa, but her during the war as well. And so, yeah, and that's one of the things that I really want to convey in the book. Like, I don't just want it to be like, here's a history book about someone who happens to be my grandpa. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be about me. Partly it's going to be about my family. And one thing that I'm going to talk about, it's, my grandpa obsessed over the whole Pearl Harbor aspect of that experience. And like every December 7th, people would show up at his door and interview him about Pearl Harbor. Like reporters would come, and like towards the end of his life, he was one of the only survivors in the area in St.
Mm.
Louis. And so like local news stations would show up and interview him. But he was in Leyte Gulf. He was in the war the entire time. We didn't hear so much about that stuff. And so like that Pearl Harbor experience was almost like an albatross,
Mm.
and so I kind of want to talk about that a little bit too. That's all we heard about, but he did so much more than that, and his war experience was so much larger than just Pearl Harbor. But why was Pearl Harbor so? There's a lot like to
Yeah.
really back there. So
Yeah, and I wonder if a big event like that allows a veteran to be able to bring their memories to something that everyone kind of understands without having to like explain like the difficulties of this like one day that nobody talks about in the history books, like um so the person I spoke to earlier that's also part of this series is the director of the Canadian Letters and Images Project, which is a collection of letters from veterans. And we looked at 2 letters from World War I from a husband who was overseas and his wife who was at home. And Stephen Davies, the historian I was talking to, he was like, we can't separate home and battlefield the way that we often do, because this is a close relationship. And it's so interesting that you're saying that like the things that you're learning are about your grandmother, because it's like that's the home relationship that that would never be found in a history book. So that's really cool too.
yeah, and I'm learning all this stuff about her that I'd never heard growing up. And like she had her own wartime adventure too. She
Mm-hmm.
was like one of the young. She was, I forget how you, middle kid I think, in a large Catholic family, and she kind of wanted to go do her own thing for a while. So she moves with her best friend to D.C. from St. Louis and gets a department or a job in the Naval Department. So she goes up and goes out, and so like I really want to talk about that and write about that. And that's the kind of story that I want my daughter to hear growing up. Like here
Mm-hmm.
your great grandmother, just packed her bags, went on a train, went to DC, and had this adventure of her own during the war.
Yeah,
um, so I'm going to have a chapter written just from her letters, and
that's awesome.
trying to give her perspective on things. So
That's really great. Okay, well, I'm already digging our conversation, and we're not even into like the meat of it or like the tofu of it. If you're a vegetarian, so what is the sources that we are talking about today, or like which elements of the letters are we talking about?
the letters I am using, well, all of them. I have several hundred of them, and they're letters like in their very raw form. So it's been a job to scan them and organize them, and just kind of get them in a way that I can use them. So I still have the letters. I will have at least most of the letters, I think, for the duration of the project, and then I might donate them someplace. So I haven't really decided what I'm going to do with them yet.
Oh my God, how amazing!
Yeah. So I've scanned probably 90% of them. So
That's so impressive. because that's so much work. Like,
Yeah.
we're, especially now with everyone teaching remotely, and people that didn't really care about the digital humanities, like, really is happy about all of the digital humanities work that's been done in the last 25 years. But like, we need to remember how much labor digitization is and transcription is, and like, we can really abstract that from a lot of the digital materials we look at. So that should be a chapter 2, and just like the labor of it. I mean, you don't need to write it. It can just be in my head.
I've gotten really good at scanning and like watching The Office,
Oh, good.
just like on autopilot.
You know the British, did you watch the British Office?
Yeah.
When they do like the clips in between the scenes and it's like the photocopier, I can just imagine that sound now is like embedded in the... So do you have something you're going to screen share?
Yeah, actually, I do. So let's get it up here, and this is not quite the one I wanted to do. I want to do this one. So this is my grandpa's letter from December 16th, 1941. This is his first full letter after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So during the war.
How old was he in 1941?
He had just turned 21.
Wow, so young.
So yeah, he's basically talking about he's safe. He couldn't really, and it's like it's a week later, but mail service was dramatically slowed down, and obviously they were pretty busy, during the days during and after Pearl Harbor. Trying to secure the harbor, putting out fires, rescuing people. So it was a very chaotic situation. There wasn't a lot of mail going out. One of the things that the Navy did was they actually gave everyone cards where you basically just circle, I'm okay. And, your son's okay. So just basically telling your parents, like, I'm alive. But this was the first time he was really able to write his parents. And a lot of people stateside didn't even hear back from their kids, or even that their kids were alive or not, until almost Christmas. So there was a real, we're complaining now about it's 3 days after the election, we still don't know who the president is, but some people had to wait 2-3 weeks after Pearl Harbor just to find out whether or not their kids were still alive. So.
And it's so interesting, is how many pages is this particular letter? Just the one, or it seems like it might be 2?
On average, his letters are about 2 to 4 pages. This one's really short because he didn't have a lot of time to write it. He was basically just trying to dash something off and let his parents know that he was okay.
Yeah, like I find it so interesting right here in that first paragraph when he was saying, like, I'm not at liberty to write concerning the war. You must know it could fall in wrong hands, but I know the news that I am okay is sufficient. Like, I know you're not really looking for an insider's update. Like, you just really want to know about me. And I'm sure that was like a little difficult for people that were serving as well, because they wanted to share details, but also knew that people at home would not have, like, that's not what they were looking for,
Yeah, I mean, that wait is interminable, anyone who's a parent, and, if you're waiting for your child who's in surgery or something like that, just hours, it's physically difficult to get through that, let alone weeks at a time. And so, yeah, I mean, it was rough for many people in the aftermath of that, trying to hear back from loved ones. So.
And it's interesting the care that he's gone through this traumatic thing, and the care that he is putting out towards his parents. Like, I know, don't worry about me. I know it's easy to say and hard to do. But if I thought that you were worrying, like, it would make matters much harder for me. And that's so interesting, that like balance of care that you're providing to the people back home while you were going through this like traumatic experience that no one but the people that you were serving with would understand.
Yeah, and that's a theme that really pervades his letters, especially like in 1942. Like, they all end with, chins up, we're going to get through this. you know, like he's trying to lift his parents up and be this emotional support. And then, you know, it starts to change over time. And then by the time 1945 rolls around, his letter's like, I just want to go home.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so as a historian, and like your book that just came out is not about this period itself, but I assume that you know quite a bit of World War II history. As a historian, what do you read from sources like this? Like both in terms of literal words, but the kind of analysis that you bring to this that you might not have gotten without your background as a historian.
Well, you know, I think it's really important to remember that when we, especially something like World War II, where you're talking about a scale involving hundreds of millions of people, if not billions, right? That all those hundreds of millions, if not billions of people are individual people, and they all have stories and they all have lives and they all have fears and dreams. And, you know, my grandpa is obviously my grandpa, but he's just one of many. And I think it's really important to, you know, when you pick up a World War II letter or a Civil War letter, well, an American Civil War letter, or, you know, whatever, that you be able to, you know, glean from that, not just information about the war, but who is this person, you know, that you're reading about? Why are they there? You know, what are they afraid of? What are they hopeful about? You know, instead of just reading about their contribution to the conflict, you know, trying to understand how the conflict shaped and transformed them. So,
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I even wrote that down. Like, who is this person and how can we better understand things like war and patriotism and freedom and serving by understanding the individuals that that we're serving or that are communicating things and like and not communicating things as well. Like yes, he's not writing about certain aspects because he can't, but as you if you're saying that like one of his themes is taking care of the people back home, and you certainly get that in that second paragraph, how much of those details would he really want to be able to share? Like that's always such an interesting balance. Do you have some other sources you wanted to show us? I see a couple tabs up there.
yeah, I have a lot of stuff up. So one of the
Great.
things, in terms of like using this as a source, there's a certain limitation there because this is like my grandpa, it's not your grandpa, right? And so,
Not, no.
and well, but like this usually leads to another conversation, which is, oh, well, you know, my grandpa left, or grandmother left some letters or had a diary or whatever. And like this, I have this conversation a lot with people because, you know, when they ask me my project, I talk to them about, they're like, oh yeah, well, you know, I know my mom has some letters from her dad or from whomever. And so one of the things that I want my book to do, and I want these letters to do, is to help kind of educate people, maybe even push people into doing the kinds of research, like the ancillary research that I did for my grandpa. And so, like, if we go up here, actually, this is for somebody else. This is for Matthew Aguila, who was a crew member on the Chew, my grandpa's ship. And he passed away, or he was killed during Pearl Harbor. And so I have, if you go to the National Archives in the United States, they have over 18 million service records from, you know, Army, Navy, Army Air Corps, anybody who fought in the war. You know, there's a mountain of paperwork for each of these people. So if you have their service number and their name, you get all kinds of information on them. You can either go to their facility. It's closed now because of COVID, but you know, when things are open, you can go to their facility, you can actually open it up and then basically do what I do, right? And just photograph everything. Or you can actually order a digital copy of it. And then somebody, like a staff member there, will actually send all this stuff to you. So, you know, that's one possibility. It's like if there's somebody related to you that might not even have that many documents or letters or whatever, you can still get this file. This file is still there. And you can get all this information on that person. And then another possibility is if you're ever in Washington, D.C., and you know something about your ancestors or your loved ones, unit or their ship or whatever, you can order records on that unit, on that ship or whatever. So these are all in College Park, Maryland, which is just outside of DC. And so this is a deck log from the USS Chew. And this is from December 7th, 1941. So this actually, like, and this is, look at, I love this document because, you know, at like 6 p.m., they're okay, well, we just took some ice cream on board, you know, and then all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, we're being bombed, you know, and it's almost immediate there. And so, you know, you can get these records are voluminous. Ships also have action reports where anytime they get in a battle or, you know, whatever, so there's a report on that. So there's just oodles and oodles of information and sources at College Park, Maryland. So anyway, it's just two different like things to check out. If you have someone in your family that served in the war, at least for the Americans, and you know, you don't have a lot of information for them because they didn't leave behind any, you can still find a lot about them just by going through these ancillary sources.
Yeah, I mean, the first source that you showed, I know that in Canada, that those are sources that people can access fairly easily through our national archives as well, and some of our provincial archives, because we have provinces, not states. Some of our provincial archives also have copies of those, but this source, I've never come across it as like a readily available source. And I would, if there's any Canadians watching, I would be really interested if, like, I would really love to be proved wrong about whether or not these sources are available. But that's really cool to be able to like introduce, you know, this like micro level human to like macro level nation and like go back and forth. Like, I think that those often are some of the best histories that go back and forth between individual and nation. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one benefit of if there's any continuity between my book, which I just put out, which is about horse stealing in the Old West, and this book about my grandfather during World War II, is that they both rely very heavily on military records, and military records are phenomenal, right? I mean, they're often like consigned to military history, you know, it's all X's and arrows and things like that, but in reality, like the military, they have to keep voluminous records and
Mm-hmm.
accurate records. And, you know, if they don't do a good job doing that, then that can get people killed. So military records are just phenomenal pots of information, not just for studying battles or wars, but, you know, for teaching, for social history, for cultural history. So.
And so, as a way to kind of conclude our conversation, what can people learn about? How can people challenge the way they normally teach World War II, for example, by looking at a corpus, a collection of letters, such as the ones that you digitized from your grandfather?
Well, I guess I would say two things. Number one is that, you know, we should personalize it, you know, and we shouldn't think of World War II as just some far off thing that, you know, happened to other people. You know, it happened to people we know and love. It's still very immediate. And, you know, and we should, you know, apart from like watching Band of Brothers or whatever, you know, we should understand the personal stories of the individuals that were involved in that. But the other thing I would say, and sort of the reason why I kind of went through all those other different ancillary sources, is that, you know, World War II, we talk a lot about how so many service people are dying, but the thing that leads to is that World War II is passing out a living memory.
Mm.
And as it passes out a living memory, we have to really reevaluate, stop taking for granted some of the things that I think we've ordinarily taken for granted. We need to start thinking of, you know, World War II as more like World War I, which is there's just not virtually no one, I think, is still alive that can talk. I mean, there might be a few people, but, you know, for the most part, there are so few veterans that are still alive from World War I that we can't take for granted that we can just go ask people. And World War II is rapidly reaching that point. And
Mm-hmm.
so as historians, as teachers, as documentarians, as whomever, you know, we need to just sort of be aware that there's this diminishing population of people that remember it, that have stories to tell. And, you know, so if you have somebody in your orbit that, you know, was alive then, even if they weren't necessarily in the war, but they just remember as a kid or whatever, they should, if you can get them to tell their story and record it, like you're doing, a tremendous service for the world, and for
Mm-hmm.
humanity by taking these stories down. I also have a 3-hour interview with my grandpa, where I sat down, I just asked him questions for 3 hours. And, if you have somebody who's accommodating enough to do that, then do it, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
just you and an iPhone, I mean, it's so.
Mm-hmm. Because you get to know, this is B. You get to know yourself better, but you also get to know yes, you get to know yourself, but like who you are in place and space as well. Like who you are in this particular town, who your family is, like how you got to where you need to be. And I think that in understanding that, it's easier to understand other things, like I didn't mean to come back to this, but like your political affiliations and things that you hope and fear for the future, and like similarities and differences you have with people that you think are completely different than you. Like the more you understand your own history, the more you can be open to making change. This Métis elder that I heard speak a couple years ago, and I quoted her in my own book, was saying, like, if you want to do the work of decolonization, which is something we talk about in Canada a lot, you need to understand how your own ancestors came to this country, and the own struggles that your ancestors went through. Because when you understand that, it's easier to understand the struggles of others. And that's an element of what I hear in what you're saying, too, like the importance of capturing that living memory and capturing those stories.
Yeah, it's really interesting for my family. My dad and my uncle, like my grandpa had 2 sons, and they both eventually joined the Navy themselves. And then my brother, a few years ago, he also joined the Navy. So we now have 3 generations of Navy people in my family. I'm the one.
And you're the
I
historian.
had asthma, so I did. I went, but like that's a service tradition that my grandpa basically started. And Pearl Harbor kind of like hung over my family, and it's become
Mm.
sort of a weird pilgrimage for all of us. Like we all have to go now to the Arizona Memorial, where I don't know how familiar Canadians are with that, but the explosion of the USS Arizona, it wasn't just like an explosion they vaporized. Like that was, you're talking this very large metallic structure that is now superheated and full of burning oil, and thousands of people die in that, and the waters around that are on fire, and it's still, the edifice of the Arizona is still leaking oil. So when you go there, you still
Mm.
see oil bubbling up, which is a very powerful reminder that this actually happened, and you're not just at some old castle someplace in Europe, like this is a very recent thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's interesting too, because sometimes your family history can be kind of difficult, I think, to like look at and question the way you would as a historian with somebody else's history. So it's really cool that you're like interested in doing that work and like the different layers that it brings to it. And I'm really glad that we got to talk about this for Veterans Day, for Remembrance Day for Canadians, which is why I'm wearing a poppy. For any Americans that don't know the significance of the poppy, it's a symbol of remembrance. Because I think that this is such a great project, and I'm really interested in seeing how it evolves into a book.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about it.
And hopefully we'll have some other opportunities to maybe talk about different incarnations of the project. So we'll stay in touch.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.